Hey, audience, welcome to Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I have a treat for you today. I think that one of the maybe top skills that professionals need to learn, and I'm even talking larger than our audience, all of you, about the people that are trying to build relationships and book a business. I'm talking about everybody in business. I think one of the top skills people need to learn is how to tell great stories. And I've got one of the top worldwide experts here, Tim. That's true. You have to soak it in because you are. Tim Grahl. Tim is, and I think what's interesting about Tim is not only is he a partner in a company called StoryGrid that helps people write stories, well, much more on that coming, but he also has grown a book of business himself with some other businesses. So he knows what it's like to be in all of your shoes, people with one foot in some deep expertise and one foot in building a book of business and influence in a relationship ecosystem. So, and also obviously a storytelling expert. So Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mo. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah. And before we get into it, I got to say thank you because audience, Tim is the person who sort of got me across the goal line to start this show. We're now 550 plus episodes in. And I was like running around in my head years ago, like, should I do it? Should I not? It's a big commitment. I want to do it right. And Tim, you were helping me think it through it. I don't even know if you remember this, but we were on a call or together one time and just asked, hey, Mo, would you wake up in the morning and be excited that you had a podcast interview? Like, yeah, I'd be really excited. I love to promote others and learn, and I would look forward to it. He's like, why don't you just do it?
Yeah. I think a lot of people forget to ask themselves what they want. And a friend of mine was trying to decide if he should sell his house. And it's like this beautiful house. And he's like giving me all the logical reasons, pros and cons. And I was like, do you like the house? And he's like, I love the house. I'm like, then why would you move? Like, you haven't even asked to me the most important question is, what do you want?
It's the best question of all. And I know we've talked a lot about that in broader aspects of life, but you did the what do you want question to me, and like weeks of fret and analysis got boiled down into like a 10-second decision. It was brilliant. Well, cool. Well, I was looking forward to this, as you might expect, and really promoting your expertise. And so you've seen the format of this season of the show. Let's start right off the bat. What's your big valuable idea that you've sort of dedicated this season of your life to, and how can it help our audience?
I think the thing that was surprising to me as I started working in this business more and more was how every single aspect of life boils down to a story. And at first, it doesn't really seem that way. It seems like we try to make logical decisions that have pros and cons, like I was just talking about. But the problem is there's literally too much data to make actual logical decisions. There's all kinds of stuff behind this. But so what it boils down to is we're always telling ourselves stories. And so understanding how stories work in our own lives and other people's lives really changes the way you interact with people, because you start understanding that the best thing to do is to meet them at that story level. I mean, stories indicate how we drive to work. It's where prejudices come from. It's how we interact with our family members. It's how we interact with our associates and our business partners. It's the stories we're telling ourselves in our head. And so once you start understanding that, even the most logical type A, whatever type person, accountant, or like, what do you know? What is the word?
Consultant, trainer, quality person
that does all the numbers. Anyway, even those
actuary,
people, an actuary, they're the ones, they tell themselves stories too. So once you understand that and you start looking at the world through this lens of story, you start seeing it in a whole new light, and it just changes everything.
Yeah. Well, 100%. And, tons of research behind this, like people remember more data, more information when things are wrapped in story. They're convinced more often when a story is told, all that kind of stuff. So when obviously you've grown a book of business in different aspects of your life, including at StoryGrid. So what are some of the tips that professionals can take away to sort of activate this?
For me, when I realized that people weren't buying, they were not failing to buy with me because of, a list of facts or a list of features or anything like that. They were doing it because of the story they were telling themselves in their head. And so once I started looking at it through that lens again, I start trying to think through, okay, well, what is happening there? What story are they telling themselves? It can be as simple as like, they see it in their mind as this long 9-month process to switch over to your product or to switch over to your service. And they don't understand that, well, actually, we take care of all of that. Looking at it through this lens of, they have a lot of pressure from lots of different places. So think through things like, who are their allies? Who are the people working against them? Do they consider their boss an antagonist or a helper in their life? And like just putting people in these kind of roles in their life helps you start to navigate how you talk to them. And then the main thing is, whenever I'm selling, I have to look at myself as a mentor, and they're on their heroic journey, right? They're the hero of their own story. And I'm coming alongside of them like, Gandalf or Obi-Wan Kenobi or any of the thousands of mentors and stories, to walk alongside them and help them make the best decision on where they want to go. And so again, once I start seeing that, it's like, okay, well, I'm just here to help them make the best decision for themselves so they can continue to see themselves as a hero in their own story. And so that really helps, especially when selling, to get me out of the way. I'm not worried about me. I'm really worried about them and helping them the best I can. And then we're joining together on their story. And that, again, it takes away all of the contention, all of the like feeling like you're on two different sides of the table. And it's like, I'm actually just here to help you get what you want out of life. And that has helped a ton too.
Yeah. Well, this is amazing. It reminds me of a prior interview I did as one of our most downloaded that we released last year. So I'm talking to the audience now. If you like this idea of this metaphor of the business development professional or the expert guiding the person to the right conclusion, which many times, not all, but many times will be hiring you, audience, go back and listen to the Brian Caffarelli interview that I did. He was amazing way he talked about this, and we'll put that link down in the show notes. So Tim, I want to drop into our second big questions of like, how do we use this idea of storytelling for professionals? So in the new upgraded Grow Big, which you've gone through the old version, which is really exciting, a lot of our audience have, as of January 2022, we released a new version. It actually includes the storytelling component. And one of the first things we ask people to do in that part of the class is write down the stories you need to get good at. What are the stories? So can you comment on that? Like from a business development perspective, what types of stories do you think someone needs to get great at?
So first of all, this is what a testimonial is, right? So when we think about a testimonial, a good testimonial tells a story in like 4 sentences, right? And the way you want to start is, this person was really bad off. Then I came along and now they're better off, or my product came along or my service came along and now they're better off, right?
Yeah.
And so I would start getting used to telling those kind of stories. So go back to like previous clients, previous customers, find those testimonials, interview them, and then turn them into a story that try to do it like you would tell it to a friend at a bar or like over a dinner table, where it's just this really natural way of like, one time we were working with this customer, they were in this really bad place, and like really detail the bad place. You want to get as detailed as possible. My partner, Sean Coyne, always says, specificity breeds universality. So sometimes our kind of knee jerk is to think like, oh, we got to kind of generalize a story so it'll fit everybody. And it's kind of paradoxical, but actually the more specific and unique the story, the more likely it is that somebody will map their own story onto it and like put themselves into the story. So This is where you're like, this company, they were 3 weeks away from bankruptcy or whatever really bad version. They were like right on the edge of falling off a cliff, and like really detail it. And then they bought my product, bought my service, and we installed it. And then, everything was great at the end, and get really specific about it. And again, even in these, I'm not the hero. The customer is the hero. The customer is the one that made the brave decision to come on and make this change and do this thing. And look how amazing they are. And you do this so well, Mo, where like whenever you tell stories about the people you've worked with, you're always talking about how amazing they are,
Yeah.
And, that's really good. And then also have some stories ready in your pocket for when people start voicing concerns about hiring you or objections to hiring you. So one time I was trying to sell this big web development project back when I did web development, and I had put in a proposal, and I was sitting at the table with like the president, the vice president, like 2 other people. This was a big decision for them. and they're like, "Hey, Tim, we really like your proposal, but it's twice as expensive as the next highest proposal. Why should we hire you?" And of course, the first thing I wanted to do is start like listing off all the features, everything I'm going to do, and all the logistical stuff. And I just sat there for a second and I said, I had this client one time and I named the client. I said they thought I was too expensive too. And so they turned down my proposal. They went out, they hired this other company. And 6 months later, they came back and had to hire me because and they ended up paying me more money because that other service provider had fucked everything up so bad. And the president just kind of sat there. He's like, all right. And then he just hired me. So I didn't give any like actual technical reason. I just told a story. And so I really think like looking through your objections, right? We talk a lot about you got to think through the objections and have something to go on, to meet that objection. And the best thing to meet that objection is to have a story. And just because it disarms everybody, right? You're not arguing anymore. Because my wife's a therapist and she's always like, people can't argue with your own experience, right? If you're like, hey, when I was a kid, this happened to me, you can still disagree with my conclusion of the story, but you're not going to be like, no, that didn't happen to you, And so a story just really disarms people because you're like, hey, I'm just going to tell you something that happened. I'm going to trust you to understand and take away what you need to take away. And it's really respectful of the other person because you're not telling them how to think. You're just telling them a story. And this is the best way to change people's minds, is to tell them a story that really makes them see the consequences of their decisions in the real world.
Oh, there's so much stuff that I want to grab a hold of. I just love that quote, specificity breeds universality. Incredible.
Yeah, it is. If I start by saying like, okay, so if I say something like, hey, when I was in my 20s, I got into a lot of money trouble. And then, I struggled and I got my way out. That's kind of this general story. But if I start telling a story like, hey, one time I was in really bad tax debt. In fact, I was so far in tax debt that the IRS sent a sheriff to my house with a subpoena, knocked on my door. My wife answered the door. And then she's calling me frantic because cops at our house with a subpoena for me from the IRS. It's like the difference of that story of like, like you're like leaning in like, no, now what did you do? Right now, I'm guessing hopefully most of you that didn't actually happen to. That did happen to me. That specificity of my story automatically gets the other person to buy into the story, even though it may have never happened to them. They can imagine what that would feel like. And so really not being afraid to like get really, really specific with the story, when it happened, the people that were there, what the weather was, what you were wearing, like anything relevant to the story to make it really specific, really just, it like breathes life into a story and it makes it feel really real and it just sucks people right in.
Yeah. Oh, it's killer. That's such great advice. So if I pop back up a level, I want to put a bow on these types of stories that the audience might think about. The testimonial story. I love what you said around that and the fact that the client is always the hero. The objection story. Loved what you said about that people can argue with your own experience. It's respectful. In your example of you being twice the cost of someone else, or investment, we might say, twice the investment, you basically reinforce the idea that was in the back of their head already of you get what you pay for. We say that all the time because it's usually true. You reinforced it, but instead of whacking somebody over the head with it, you told a story, and in their own mind, they're probably thinking, yeah, you know what, I'm going to get what I'm going to pay for. The audience, the third major type of story that I think is really important, just from my own personal perspective, is your personal origin story. Meaning, why did you dedicate your life to becoming a high stakes litigator at a big firm that handles this particular type of IP issue or whatever? And I want to get your thoughts on this, Tim, is that if you tell the right origin story around why you do what you do and why you'll do it till you're old with walking with a cane and you want to do it forever, that's really powerful. We've just found people will follow you forever if they believe that you're passionate about what you do. So Tim, your thoughts on that sort of professional origin story?
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind when you say that is I think we all want to know. One time, Seth Godin, one of his thousands and thousands of blog posts, he wrote this blog post that the world would be a better place if all marketers actually believed in the products they were selling, right? So whether you're marketing for PETA or the NRA, it doesn't matter. if you actually believe in the story. And I think what we're trying to get at there when people want to know our origin story is like, why do you do this besides the money? Like, why do you care about this? You know? And this is where it's like, unless you are literally just in it for the money, which I think in rare cases people are, but I think even why are you doing this? Why are you here to help people? That's what people want to connect with you on this human level where they feel like you're in this to be a helpful person and you really care. And it's like, yes, you're going to get paid in the process, but that's almost ancillary. And so I think that origin story, it matters to people because they want to know that you care about them and you care about them beyond just this deal. And again, that's where I come back to like thinking through, like, I'm here to help you get what's best for you. Now, obviously, I believe my product or service is what's best for you in most cases. You know, I'll tell people if it's not, but really, I'm just here to help you. And that's what I think people want to know is like, why are you doing this? You know, are you actually here to help me? Or are you here just for you?
Yeah, I love it, Tim. So audience, with those three big ideas of story types, the testimonial story, the overcoming objection story, and your origin story. Now, Tim, I'd love you to share your thoughts on what are the three big components of story? You know,
yeah, we have the 5 commandments of storytelling.
Okay.
And I'll hit on mainly 3 of them, but this shows up. I mean, this is one of those, like, I'm going to just kind of wax poetic about StoryGrid for a sec. Because StoryGrid was created by my partner, Sean Coyne. He's been an editor and writer for over 30 years. He's edited major bestsellers across all kinds of domains. And he basically built up this way of looking at story to find problems with your story. And once you start understanding it, it's really amazing. It's kind of like the first time you look in a microscope and you see, you know, dirt from the ground and you put under a microscope and then you see all the little bugs moving in it, right? And you're like, oh my God, I didn't know all that was there. That's what StoryGrid does for you with story. Yeah. So there's 5 commandments of story. They show up everywhere, every scene, every story, whether short, small, you know, it doesn't matter. The first is the inciting incident. So the inciting incident is what knocks the protagonist's life out of balance, right? So for instance, if we're using the same IRS story, my life was going along fine. And then a sheriff shows up at my door with a subpoena. That knocked my life out of balance, right?
Yeah.
So the inciting incident is always something knocked my life out of balance, right? So again, if we're talking in a business development sense, it would be something like, oh, we realize we have to upgrade our software in the next 6 months, or we're going to have this huge security breach, right? So it's like something happens where people realize something has to be fixed. We have to do something. We have to make a change. Then the second is turning point progressive complication. Basically, it just keeps getting worse. You keep trying to fix it, like by using means that you're used to that won't cost you very much, both, you know, money, time, effort, all that. And you finally reach a crisis and you're like, all right, I've got to make a decision here. And it's always a binary choice. I either do this or I do this. And we call them, there's 2 types. We call them the best bad choice, which means I have 2 bad choices. What is the best version of that bad choice, right? So it's like, if I'm hanging from a girder, I can let go and fall in the water. I can kind of jump over and catch a windowsill. Both of those are bad options, right? The other type of crisis is irreconcilable goods. So 2 goods that you can't have at the same time. So I'm in love with 2 women. I can't have them both. I got to pick one. So the crisis always reaches this point where I have to make a decision. The climax is the decision I make. And then the resolution is what happens as a result of that decision. Number 1, inciting incident.
Yep.
Number 2, it's long. It's turning point progressive complication. And
is that the keeps getting worse part?
Yeah, it keeps getting worse. And I'll give everybody a place where they can get a resource where they can learn about all this at the end.
Okay, good.
So third is crisis. That's where finally it keeps getting worse to the point where I have to make a decision about what I'm going to do.
Okay.
The climax is the decision. Did I do A or did I do B? And then finally, the resolution, that's number 5, which is what happens as a result of me making a decision. I either let go and fall in the water and now we see what happens, or I jump for the window ledge and we see what happens.
Good. This is great. Yep. So just keep rolling and what I love are these practical tips of Well, actually, you were going to focus on three things, I think.
Yeah, the three big things is like we have the inciting incident that knocks the protagonist's life out of balance, which eventually reaches a crisis where the protagonist has to make a choice that they don't want to make. And then the resolution is what happens once they make that choice. And so this is what you're always trying to bring, right? When you lay this on top of business development training, you see this pretty clearly, where like you start with, why did you call me in the first place? Or what's going on in your company that you're even interested in what I'm doing? Usually the inciting incident happened before you came on stage, because we don't need the mentor until we have a problem to fix. So since we're the mentor, we come on after the inciting incident's happened, but you got to know what that inciting incident is, what caused them to call you in the first place. And then you start like just pointing out all the things they're going to have to deal with, right? This is where you start showing that they've got to make a change. They've got to do something, right? And you bring them to this point of crisis, which is, are you going to go with us, or are you not going to go with us? Right? And then they have to make the decision. And what you're trying to do by the time you get to the crisis is it's so clear that they have to make a decision, first of all, and you're the clear decision. And then the resolution comes once they've signed with you and you're working together, right? Those progressive complications, it's always the longest part. It's almost always the longest part of the story, because you're ratcheting up, right? Because most of us think about, like, let's say we get up in the morning and we go to make coffee and we realize we're out of coffee grounds. We don't immediately jump in our car at 5 a.m. and go to the grocery store. First, we're like, all right, there's got to be some here somewhere, right? So you're like digging through your pantry, you're like opening all the cabinets. And it's only at the point of the crisis where you're like, I got to put on my shoes, get in the car, and drive to now what am I going to do? Am I going to go without coffee, or am I going to go get coffee? Right. So it's like, we always try to like, this is where we like, it's not that bad. We can deal with this. We can deal with this. And what you try to do is make sure they understand, like, if you leave that inciting incident alone and you don't do anything, it's only going to get worse. Right. And you start pointing out all the ways it's going to get worse until the point where it's like, you have to make a decision. And honestly, if you watch any movie, this is a lot of times what the mentors they're just trying to get the protagonist to make a decision. Just do something, anything, right? Because you keep putting this off. And that's how I think about this, is it's like, I'm trying to get them from the inciting incident to their crisis and make sure they have all the information they need by the time they reach that decision point to make the best decision.
Yep. This is so powerful. And then when we think about, let's drop in and give some practical tips on like the testimonial story, because this is a really common one. There's an expert that's listening to this right now. They're like, gosh, I saved the day many times, but this one particular time was really powerful. And I tend to tell that story a lot. So what you and I can do now, Tim, is we can help them fine tune that story. Mm-hmm. So let's just go through a full example. So let's say somebody's a consultant. We have a lot of consultants that are listeners, and that genre sort of works for lawyers and healthcare account managers and everybody else, because we're all sort of consultants in the broadest sense. So let's say a bad thing happens at a client, consultant gets pulled in, everybody works really hard, the client's the hero in the end, and then there's some kind of a resolution at the back end. So like walk through how that might work in practicality.
So it depends on how long the testimonial is, right? And this is like a really great writing exercise, is to like write a 5-page paper, write 5 pages about something, then rewrite it as 1 page, then rewrite it as a paragraph, then rewrite it as a sentence. Like, how do you capture 5 pages in a sentence? So what I always encourage people to do is like get a long testimonial, because you can always cut it later. But so this is where get on a call like this, get on a Zoom call, record it, and just have a conversation with the client and just ask them tons of questions, right? And you want to really get it like, so especially since this is in the past, they're going to be more open with you now, because when you're in a sales situation, they may be holding some cards, right? Where once you guys have a really good relationship and it's after they've already engaged with you, if you go back and ask them questions or go, well, actually, it was way worse than I even told you. You know what I mean? So I always want to get that inciting incident really, really clear. And I want to make it as painful as possible, right? Mm-hmm. So like, if we get kind of crass about it, it's like, imagine like you cut your arm, right? That would be an inciting incident. I got to go to the hospital or something. I want to talk about how deep the cut was, how much it hurt, how much it bled, like it was nasty. I was almost fainted from the pain. Like, you want to get really specific. You want to do that with the inciting incident. Like, get really specific. What pain was the client under? Because you want to show how they go from the deepest, darkest hole to the highest mountain by engaging with your company.
To jump in there, so give examples like that might be the person's name is on the line. Like think about the deep connection that people have when they need to hire an expert because their name's going to go south. If a project doesn't turn around, if something's not implemented correctly, if a big meeting doesn't go well, if a project doesn't like that, your name being on the line, I'm talking to the audience, obviously, for your clients. That's really important. One step away from that would be their career's at risk. They're not going to get promotion. They're not going to get their bonus. They're not going to be able to get the next thing that they want that has implications for how they lead their family, all kinds of things like that. So I think my mind, Tim, as you talk about, are the really bad specific for us might be somebody's name being on the line. Their career won't be able to go in the right way. Those are like really deep things on the professional level. Does that resonate and keep going?
Yeah. And then if you can spread it into the personal level as well, where it's like, I would go as far as like, their parents, they really needed to be able to afford to put them in a nicer place to live. And if this doesn't go through and they don't get that bonus, they're not going to be able to afford, it's like my kids are going to college, like really bring it home to that person where people are like, I know what that feels like. You want people hearing the testimonial be like, oh man, I know what that feels like. Then you want to start like laying out all the options that they could have done. It's like, well, they could have not done anything. That's always an option. They could have hired this person. They could have gone this route. They could have gone this cheaper place. And then just lay out if they did that, this negative thing would happen. And so eventually they decided to take the step and work with us, skip over all the part that you do, right? And then it's like, after we work together, and then get really specific about the mountaintop. What was it like afterwards? They got promoted. Not only did they get promoted, their kids didn't have to take any loans out when they went to college, or the company that person worked for was able to bring on 3 new clients because they were able to upgrade something, or because they had this new playbook in place that you helped them with. It's like always get really, really clear, because the people on the other hearing the testimonial will infer that you're the reason why. You don't have to be overly explicit with that. You just have to show the heroic journey of the client and how they went from a really dark place to the top of the mountain, because in there somewhere, of course, they engage with you. And so we do this a lot when we're writing blurbs for stuff of like, hey, before talking specifically about books, like a business book or something, hey, before I read this book, I didn't know how to do sales at all. I couldn't talk to anybody. After reading this book, I was able to close 3 new sales in 3 weeks or something. It's like you take somebody just in 4 sentences from like, I didn't know anything to this amazing thing happened. And again, you're taking them from that inciting incident all the way to the resolution of what happens because they made that choice to work with you.
Yep. Oh, there's so much gold there. One thing I want to point out to the audience, 2 things. One thing you said that was really powerful is you skip over what you do. That's all covered in other places. It's in Gantt charts, it's in PowerPoints, it's in other things that you've talked about, because that's usually what you're talking about. So I thought that was interesting, because with the story you're talking about, it gets much deeper than that. The other thing that I think is really interesting about the resolution, that sort of view from the mountaintop after things are resolved, is what we've found in our classes is that most people don't spend enough time on that, A, and B, when a resolution is really powerful, and I want your feedback on this, the result is much bigger than anybody ever could have thought of. The original frame is you're hired to do X and you do X and it's really good. But the resolution should show it had massive impact, much bigger than X, 10X, 100X, the impact on somebody's family. The fact that playbook that you created together impacted 1,000 more people than we ever thought it would be. The fact that their shareholder results or their stock price went up because the cost takeout project was so big that it was much bigger. It had great results and implications for long-term for all the shareholders and stakeholders, all that stuff. Like somehow having personal and financial and something about the resolution has to be much bigger than anyone ever could have anticipated. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And I think about it like you hit on this, but really thinking as broad as possible. Like look at everywhere that hits, right? So let's take something, for instance, like I decide New Year's, I'm going to, lose 30 pounds and get in shape. All right.
Mhm.
So an obvious clear thing is like, well, my clothes fit better. I feel better, whatever. But then you start getting into like, well, my kids are going to have their dad for longer. Right.
Mm.
And I'm going to be a better husband and I can actually go do activities. So like my dog has a happier life because I take him for a walk more. And then it's like, because I feel better, I've inspired 3 other friends of mine to lose weight. And now look at them and look at their families. Like just keep like going out. Like this stuff resonates. And even talk about this person went from being stressed out to not being stressed out. Well, who in their life benefited from them not being stressed anymore, right?
Mm.
Their assistant, their coworkers, their friends, their family, their kids, like, just those kind of emotional things too, that I think a lot of times we don't talk about enough, but like everybody feels them. And the other thing I found, and, is that when you crack the seal on the emotional side of the conversation, everybody tends to breathe a sigh of relief and they'll share their side of it too. Right. So when you like, a lot of people kind of hold back on talking about that, like the stress or the like just happiness and like all of this, that people tend to like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like I'm so stressed out. And that's the thing is like, we often forget these are just people on the other side of the table. Right. And they're just dealing with the same stuff we're dealing with. And so it's like by recognizing like whatever you're working on together, they are probably really stressed about and like losing sleep about. And so just you solving this for them, they'll be able to sleep better at night. Like what's that going to do for them? And even if you don't explicitly say this stuff, like when you're first writing that 5-page version of the testimonial, like put it all down. You can always cut it down later.
Yep.
But you'll have it in your mind and it'll be there at a subtle level and people will really resonate with this as well.
This is so great. Tons of value there. So I want to switch gears. We've got 3 more questions that I've asked all the guests in this season. And then we've got, as you know, the super powerful inspirational nudge, the wild card, the spin question, which you don't know what you're going to get. Can't prepare for it. So we'll do these faster for time reasons, but I am curious. We talk about this a lot, but share with the audience, what's your personal system to keep learning and keep getting better at your craft?
This one I probably struggled with all the questions. I think my thing is just keeping in mind that I can only become really, really good in my life at a handful of things. So I can't be world class at 20 different things. And so I try to keep in mind, I've actually been dealing with this over the last few months. So like for me, I want to be a writer. Like that's what I want to be. If I die and I haven't written things that I'm proud of, everything else will seem like a waste of time. And so once I realized that, and then I looked at my life, I have to become really, and like just look at where I spend my time and energy and effort. I start moving things around to make sure that's the number one thing. Like if somebody just watched my life, would they say Tim wants to be a world-class writer? Or would they come up with something else that I'm spending my time on? And so I feel like I'm always open to learning new things, typical ways, podcasts, books, all that, having good friends that can give me feedback. But the one thing that I can do for myself that nothing else can do is know what I want. We're back to where we started. And so I try to keep that in my mind of like, it's really easy to get distracted by other things. And so always having a check of like, hey, if somebody walked behind me and watched my life, would they make the same list of things that I say are important to me just by watching my life? And if the answer is no, I need to make some changes. So that's kind of the overarching thing I try to do.
Oh, it's really powerful. And I know you personally took a look at your calendar one time and looked at the boxes on there. And that was your way of evaluating like analytically if they walked behind you. And I thought, and you made some changes, which is
I did.
Cool. So next question, I actually am super curious about your answer to this. What, in your work, your perspective, all the people you've worked with, other business owners, the people in your guild at StoryGrid, all that, what are the lies that you hear people tell themselves that hinders their growth or their progress?
Honestly, the thing that holds people back the most is the unwillingness to assume that they're wrong. Like, the thing I think we've dealt with most in StoryGrid with my own clients, and then I've seen in myself over the years, is so this is actually in my book, Running Down a Dream. I talk about this, where I had a good friend of mine and she was helping give feedback on the first book I ever wrote. And I asked her specifically, read the book, give me feedback. We get on the phone, we start going through the feedback. I start arguing with her. And at the end, she's like, this was horrible. Like, why did you do this to me? She's like, if you want my feedback, then take it. And I realize what happens is I ask for help. And then I also get embarrassed that I need help. And so then when she starts putting her fingers on things that I know are problems, I get defensive. I actually get embarrassed and feel ashamed. And so then I want to defend myself and I argue. Mm-hmm. Now, as somebody who people ask advice of, that's probably one of the most frustrating things is, like, people will join our course and then get mad that we have a really strong opinion on something. And I'm like, you paid us to teach you what we know. And now you're getting mad at us for teaching you what we know. And so I think, be really careful about selecting people you listen to. And then once you do, your assumption should be everything they tell you is absolutely correct until you go test it and prove it's not, right? So if a mentor or a book or a magazine or whatever you read, don't just read and be like, well, that won't work for me. Like, go out, try it, prove it wrong. I had somebody do this because I always tell the editors we train to raise their prices. And I'm like, every time you send out a proposal, raise your prices 10% until you have 3 people in a row say no. Just do it. And this one woman, Pearl, she's like, there's no way that's going to work. That's not going to work. But Tim told me to prove him wrong and then he'll help me. I was like, you're not allowed to come ask me for advice until you've done it.
Yeah.
And she ended up tripling her prices, the same work, and tripling her prices. And she's like, well, I guess Tim was right. And I'm like, see, like, you thought I was wrong, but you did the right thing, which was like, you felt like I was wrong, but said, I'm going to assume he's right. I'm going to go test it. And look, it worked. And if it didn't, now you know. And so it drives me crazy. I think people too often, it's our own ego, our own shame, our own insecurities. But it's like, when you're talking to somebody who's smarter than you, do not argue with them. Just do what you're told and then see what happens.
I love it. And I'll give a shameless plug now for your book, Running Down a Dream. You've got a couple, and I liked it enough. I got it for my wife and daughters, and it's audience. It's really short chapters, really fast read. It almost is like you're running downhill, and lots of great stories that are inspiring. Okay. Last major question before the super powerful inspirational nudge. Tim, you talked about knowing what you want. Then the next question after that is, how do you personally keep yourself on track?
I'm really quick to cut things out of my life. I always laugh and tell people I'd be like the easiest person to murder because I just do the same thing every single day. I go to the same place. I do the same things every single day. There's literally 3 things I care about. And I just do those over and over and over. And whenever I realize something's creeping in, I just cut it out. Like, I've cut all social media out of my life. I don't watch that much TV. I don't do much other than those things. And I always have, like, and you've helped me with this, like, clear goals of where I'm going, where I'm trying to get. And I just really stay focused on those. And I think that it is enlivening for me because it's things I want. I truly want. I think a lot of people get burnt out or like all the bad things because they pick something that somebody else told them they should want. And then they spend all their time trying to get that thing. And that's a really dangerous way to go. And so I think be really careful about what you're choosing and making sure that it's something you care about. Like, again, just picture yourself at the end of your life. Like, if I get this thing and that's all I get, will it have been worth it? Most people, writing is not that thing, and that's fine. That's good. But for me, it is. And I've tried to do other things and it just sucks my soul. And so I think just being really careful to pick and then just constantly evaluate what you're spending your time and effort on and make sure it's going towards those things.
Yeah. Well, real quick, everybody's going to be curious. What are the other two? Writing's one of your three. What are the other two?
My business and then jujitsu.
Well, and I know we're putting family in there somewhere because I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about being a husband and a dad. Yeah. I was trying to pick the three and I didn't know where it was. What then?
Yeah. Well, I feel like family is they get all the results of all the stuff I do of becoming a better person, which all of those things constantly force me to become a better person. I'm with my family all the time. But when I think about like going from point A to point B in my life and what will point B look like and what will I have accomplished in those areas, it's like,
Yeah. No, I get it. And I know how much time you spend on thinking about being a great husband, dad, things like that. All right. So last question before we wrap things up and let people know how they can learn more about what you do. So here we go. It's time for the super powerful inspirational nudge. We're going to spin the wheel. So audio listeners, you can hear the spinning maybe. Your question, Tim Grahl, is, this popped up with John Acuff too. Same one. What have you learned today?
oh gosh, it's so dumb.
Dumb is good sometimes.
So I do CrossFit. Today we were maxing out our push press, which is putting weight over your head. And I lifted the heaviest I've ever lifted, 280 pounds, because I moved my hands slightly further out on the bar and it allowed me to get further under the bar. So if I moved my hands about an inch out, I was able to get more oomph on that bar and get it over my head a lot easier. So that is the thing that I learned today.
I think what's neat about that example is it seems small and it's not small because we talk a lot and you are always refining and always like trying to dial in something just a bit more. And so I know that that's one example of today, but I know you'll have 10 today and I know you have 1,000 in a month or something like whatever that adds up to be 300 or whatever, but you're always like dialing things in. And I think that's one of the characteristics of somebody that's really achieving a lot in life and getting what they want out of it is focusing on few things and making just gazillions of little incremental improvements in those three, like in your area, in your three areas.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's a flaw because, my wife, years ago was like, I had done something and she's like, if you had a superhero name, it would be the complicator, because I will take something and like way overcomplicate it, trying to make it, quote, perfect. But actually after lots of therapy and some other things, I've reined that in. And it's like, I just always like am looking for the most efficient way, the best way to do something. And to me, it's a game. I just do it because it's constantly gamifying everything for me. But like if my wife tried to live her life that way, she would be miserable. I've been doing CrossFit for like 13 years. So, incremental changes are about the only thing that's left. So we're constantly incrementing to try to get a little bit better. It's that whole, if you get 1% better every day, over a long period of time, it adds up. And, I really like that phrase, long obedience in the same direction. And that's kind of how I live my life.
Yeah, me too. And the positives are obvious as you get really good at something. And the negatives are, at least for me, we've talked about this. When I turn my eye to something I can't quite solve, I can just sit there and loop around and ruminate about it and get in a spiral.
Like I used to point it at my kids, right? That's not helpful, right? So learning it's like a superpower, but it's, I don't want to point it at everything. I want to be wise about what I use it on. But I think constantly incrementing, looking for little tiny ways to get a little bit better without driving yourself crazy is probably the best way.
That's perfect. That's the perfect ending. Okay. So question for you. A lot of people are going to want to learn more about StoryGrid. You teach people how to write great novels. Like it's like getting at the highest level, it's like getting a better than an MFA in a lot less time because you're so practical. But tell us more about StoryGrid. How can people get a hold of you, learn more, stuff like that?
Yeah. So the best thing to do, my partner wrote a book called StoryGrid 101, and it's all the basic.
What?
Oh yeah. There you go. StoryGrid 101 right there.
I got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
You can get a
super quick read.
Yeah.
Too, by the way.
You can get a free copy at storygrid101.com. Just put in your email address and we'll send you all the ebook versions. And if you want a paper version, you can go to storygrid.com/books and you can order it there. It's free plus shipping. And so if you want to know more about StoryGrid, I highly recommend you download that. It has changed my life. I mean, literally, I was doing something completely different with my life. I read the book, The StoryGrid. I called Sean. We started working together, and now it's my job. So it's life-changing.
I love what you did with it in that I know audio listeners, you can't see me flipping through the pages, but you can just devour this in a few minutes. And it gives you this high-level, overarching way of thinking about story. The 5 commandments are in here, all the stuff that you talked about. And it's just easy. I mean, you could put it in your hip pocket and carry it around. It's so small and digestible. So where do they go just in case somebody's barreling down the highway?
Yeah. So storygrid101.com to get the free book. Or if you want to get the book or see a bunch of other stuff we do, just go to storygrid.com.
Yeah, I love it. And /books if they want to go right to books.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, we'll put those down in the show notes too, but that's fantastic. Tim, I knew this would be good because every time I talk to you, I learn something, but we went deeper in StoryGrid than you and I have ever gone before, short of walking around Breckenridge and you're like getting really deep into it.
Yeah.
This is going to be so helpful to our audience. Thanks for being on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.